Well, welcome back. Well, of course, with the announcement this week, Alberta students, K-12 students who've been in school since early January, will no longer have to wear masks as of Monday. But for post-secondary learning in Alberta, that hasn't resumed in person yet. It has remained online, expected to resume then by the end of the month. Yesterday, Alberta's advanced education minister sent a letter to the post-secondary institution board chairs, reminding them of the changes set to take effect on March 1st. And making it clear that the expectation is that these institutions will align their policies with the government, meaning a return to in-person learning without masking and without proof of vaccination requirements. Now, today, the University of Calgary said that they will continue with masking through to the end of this winter term. In part, they say because of guarantees of masking requirements, guarantees that were made to students when they enrolled for in-person classes. So joining us to talk about the situation around the return to learning in post-secondary institutions is Alberta's Minister of Advanced Education, Demetrios Nicolaitis, joining us this afternoon. Minister, thanks for joining us here. Welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
So the letter, talk about why you felt there was a need to make all of this clear to post-secondary institutions and what you hope it will accomplish.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think, there's a couple of reasons. I think first and foremost, I think it's incumbent upon me as minister to ensure that there are strong, open lines of communication with our institutions, that they have a clear understanding of what the recent changes are that government has announced and how it affects their particular institution. As well, it's also my responsibility as minister to outline individual expectations and how institutions should manage certain elements of their affairs. Of course, that the specifics of that is up to the individual boards of governors, but I think it's important to help set some high-level guidelines as it relates to the removal of restrictions during this time. I think it's important that we do see some alignment across government agencies and commissions. But most importantly of all, I think it's necessary to have this letter so that our institutions and our students can have some predictability about what the future will look like and can begin to make accurate plans and preparations for that.
Well, and fair enough, and maybe that's what the University of Calgary is doing today, so saying that masking will remain in place through the end of the semester. So your thoughts on that?
Yeah, and I think, that, again, each individual board of governors has to look at their dynamic, their situation, their campus, their students, and make the decisions that are best for their individual institutions. And yeah, I'm sure this is a period of transition. So, I'm happy to work with all of our post-secondary institutions as we navigate through these waters. We have to, of course, watch very closely what's happening with COVID with respect to cases and hospitalizations to ensure that we are in a position to be able to remove masks and other measures on March 1st as was stipulated. So happy to stay connected with them as we work through this very fluid period.
Right. Well, the letter seems to ascribe much more certainty to the March 1st date than maybe was announced this week. I mean, March 1st is, as I understand it from the Premier's announcement, contingent on certain trends in hospitalization. So, I mean, how much stock can we put in the March 1st date at this point?
Yeah, well, as you said, it depends on what's happening with case levels and primarily what's happening with hospitalization levels. Of course, we are starting to see those hospitalization levels plateau, and what we've seen throughout the course of the pandemic is there's usually about a 2 to 3 week lag. If cases increase, we start to see hospitalizations increase a few weeks after that. If they decrease, we start to see hospitalizations decrease a few weeks after that. So we anticipate that trend to continue, but indeed, we have to monitor the hospitalizations very carefully before we're able to really proceed with stage 2.
I wonder if you could talk about why we don't have in-person learning at the moment, because it feels like this is quite a shift to go from no in-person learning at all to all of a sudden go to complete in-person learning with no restrictions in place or measures in place, at least as laid out in this letter. So why aren't students there now?
Yeah, well, I mean, not entirely. I think it's important to remember that this past fall semester, which began in September, was largely in person. The vast majority of our institutions were delivering classes in person this September and October. And of course, there were masking requirements and vaccination requirements. I think, on the vaccination requirements, as the Premier mentioned, similar to the restriction exemption program, the real purpose behind those was to help boost vaccination rates. And now with 90% of Albertans 12 and over with the first dose, and I think those rates are actually higher for post-secondary faculty and staff. I think those programs have really been effective. Of course, we saw our institutions move to online learning as the new Omicron variant started to spread, which I think was prudent. We were still trying to learn a lot from a public health standpoint about what Omicron meant and how it would interact. So I think for an element of public safety and the safety of their students and staff on campus, many of our institutions made the decision. Some didn't. Some decided to move online. But now we know a lot more about Omicron. Cases are declining, keeping a close eye on hospitalizations as well. And I think that with those changes, it warrants us to examine our policies, not just as government, but as post-secondary institutions, and to explore whether those policies are needed, are effective, and find ways to move forward.
So is it the expectation, though, that regardless of the status of stage 2, that in-person learning in some form resume by the 1st of March?
Well, as I mentioned in the letter, I think it's important for our institutions to align their policies with the government policy. So I think we have to continue to watch closely the COVID hospitalization numbers and see what happens. Of course, health and safety is the number one priority, and ensuring that there's not additional pressure on our medical system. So I think it's important that we watch carefully what's happening with the hospital numbers, what's happening with government response, and there may need to be course corrections and adjustment along this process, and that's totally fine, and we'll tackle those together.
So we mentioned the University of Calgary's announcement today. I mean, to what extent are you prepared to respect the decisions made by institutions? What would be a line for you in terms then of maybe some repercussions from your department?
Yeah, I don't think we need to get into an environment where we're looking at that type of thing. I feel very fortunate to be able to work very collaboratively with all of our post-secondary institutions over the past 3 years. At the end of the day, as I mentioned, the Board of Governors has the legislative authority to determine and to manage the operation of their institution. So it's ultimately up to them. Again, I think it would be helpful to see all agencies of government, including our post-secondary institutions, ultimately align with government policy at the end of the day. Again, it may take us some time to get there. There may be some twists and turns and road bumps that we have to deal with, but I'm confident we can deal with those together.
All right. Well, we'll leave it there for now. Minister, appreciate making some time for us here today. Thanks for the update.